we're going to show today is how to build a window in reverse and then explain all the parts it took to make it with. Carlos, who's been with me for 7 years and absolutely knows our way of doing things and how to do it in such a way that you can tell a craftsman did it as opposed to just slap together. So I'm going to leave it up to him to take it apart and show you how many parts and pieces there are in the process of his taking it apart. And then we'll describe them all as he goes. Go for it, Carlos. Whoops, I'm going to get out of the way here so I'm out of the light. Maybe you drill. Oh, you want to split it around? On this part right here, you'll see on the side of it where he's also done a little bit of work on it. I'll also explain that a little bit later. Okay. Now, there you go. That's how fast it comes apart. And it goes together about that fast again, since we have all the holes pre-drilled and all the things done. Carlos, thank you very much. Did a wonderful job. Okay. Some of the pieces on here, the sides, you'll notice, have been rabbeted so that when we put the bottom in, it sits into that ledge. And the way he's got this cut, when it goes in there at that angle, it's angle cut here so that it's a flat surface. That sits in there with a couple screws. That's retained. The same thing he had set up on this side with that board on the top. What we're doing with these windows that I said I'd mention in a minute, a couple things are happening. We've gone through, since we originally saw these windows and picked them out, reglazed all these outer edges. In this case, we mixed in a milk paint, a green, to give it a nice marbled effect. And then this was where a piece of rot and damage was. So I've cut out this space, and we're going to put a plug in and glue it and nail it, and then this first surface will be flat again and secure. In this case, the top window is not going to operate. In other words, it's not going to go up and down. This will be a fixed unit, and so when we put it in, we will actually caulk it and screw it when we set it into the frame. The other window will operate, and that's this other pane right here. And since it's going to be operating, what we've done is put a weather stripping on the side of it. It's a little brush with a nice hard nylon in the middle of it. And then on the bottom of it is a silicone strip, a bead that's hollow, that's set into a little ledge right there. And that allows it to come to a close and seal at the bottom and keep air from coming in and out. So what we're effectively doing is weatherizing this window. Now in this case, this was a very nice high-end window, and it had a piece of weather stripping already in place on this side that's done in copper. And you can just see it on the bottom here with these little tiny pin nails in it. And that's a copper strip that has a bend in it that goes into a groove right there and acts as sort of a spring tension. So when these two come together at a slight angle, this helps stop the wind and it won't wear out. This is an old-fashioned method that was used some 40, 50 years back, and actually is the best kind you can use today. It's one of the most expensive types of flashing, is this copper flashing right here. Now normally you also use copper nails so that you don't have a little bit of rusting. You see here they didn't, so there is a little bit of rusting right here at the point where the flashing meets. But otherwise, when this piece meets that, so from the other side, that bevel, which you can see right there cut into here, this little bevel part ends up connecting with that other bevel part to create a great seal. Actually, I'll turn it this direction. And then you can see how nicely that fits together. And then your lock, all the locks are designed where it's like a cam. So as it goes in, it pulls it tighter and tighter. And if you don't have locks on there, there's two bad things that happen to your windows. And this is something we run into a lot. One of them is that this bottom sags on this upper sash. When that bottom piece of wood droops, it causes this to come and widen out and split and all these come apart. So the lock isn't just a matter of security. The lock is actually the way you secure this very narrow piece at the bottom from sagging. And I've seen many an old window that was ruined because of that. Because once that sags, there's a gap in the bottom, somebody caulks it or does something else stupid. Instead of lifting it back up, propping it, putting a lock on it to hold it. This is only a 1-inch thick piece of wood at the bottom. And so consequently, it doesn't have a lot of strength. It's only held in really by one nail at each point that's put all the way through the head, no head on anything. It just goes through and you can't see it. And it's these two slices right there interlock each other. You don't want that to rot out. And so it's really important to not let water get in there. So when this droops, it's what happens. So for security, yes, have locks. But more importantly, even if you look at the real early ones, the 1800 locks, they actually went around, grabbed it, and then the last step was pulled it shut. So that you don't get the gap in here, which is where all the air blows through. So two reasons to use the lock besides security: holds the bottom of your outer window up and pulls it together so you don't have air loss through your old-fashioned windows. If you do those two things, plus you have that little flashing in there, that baby seals tight. Now the problem is if you paint it with latex paint or something dumb like that, then when it gets hot in the summertime, you've got it all nice and locked shut tight and everything, and you painted the seal in here between it, well, you might as well figure that window's not going to open again for a very long time until you take it apart and are able to pull these apart without cutting everything to bits. And on this side, you'll see it was done. I noticed as I was looking at this, right here, all this paint right here. That's why we're going to seal the top shut anyway. This was a double operating window, but after they painted it so many times, it didn't go up and down. And so why go ahead and bother moving it up and planning for it when nobody ever does? The top window generally stays closed. And for us, for the Venturi effect to work in our house, I want them to open the loft windows, the gable end windows, because that gets the air to move all the way from here, all the way out the top. I want some air to leak, except in the dead of winter when the wind's blowing. And even then, if I'm going to use a fire inside or some heating, I want air. So this gives you weather stripping, gives you the best of both worlds. You save, again, so much energy by using this, beautiful glass. If you saw the reflection in this at all, you'll see that light just dancing around. I'm going to blind you over there, yes. But the light dances off of that and ripples, because this, again, was glass. It was blown in a long bubble in a pit, and they picked out this long bubble and set it up on the table, and they went in and cut this in and cut that in and ran this down and just opened it up. And since it's a liquid that's frozen at a high temperature, when I say cut, I don't mean cut like a saw. I mean when you drag steel across glass with a cutting wheel and just score the top, just barely scratch it. At that moment, all those molecules in that glass from swimming around, just enjoying themselves, all of a sudden go twang, and they all point this way, anything that's nearby. And for the next 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, depending on the temperature, they'll keep pointing this way. You can just pop and snap that glass just clean as a bee. It's not cutting it, it's just etching or scratching it. Now, if you happen to wait an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, you just have a nice scratch on the glass. Don't think you're going to break it in that spot. It has nothing to do with why it's going to break, because there's a scratch there. So glass is an amazing thing. When you think about the energy that went into melting sand and those guys put into blowing those big bubbles and then being able to cut them open and make these giant panes of glass, and then the work that went into taking down the trees that were 500 years old, cypress in a lot of cases, or antique pine, to make these sashes, which we can't get again, and all the wood we use, which is, again, all old growth lumber. What we save in resources in this one window by saving it, just by using human energy, a little bit of putty, and a little bit of work, we can't afford to replicate. Most of us cannot afford the kind of money it takes to build this thing and all this beautiful wood by hand. That's why we buy all that crap we buy now with artificial plain little dividers and stuff like that. So what you're looking at in human labor in today's dollars and American dollars of human labor, you probably have $400, $500 in labor in this one piece. And this being, again, if you buy the lumber, the quality lumber and stuff to make this piece, this is a $1,000 to $2,000 window. You might find this for $50 and $100 as part of your salvage. Off the site, you can put this together and have yourself a window worth a couple grand. And you see all the parts you need. And this is just lumber that's been taken from this status, which is just still got the cheesecloth from the tacks on the walls or the ceilings. It's just boards sliced up, and then a little bit of edging done with a router on the edges on these pieces that'll hold the windows in. A little bit of work running it over the saw 6 times to make a groove. That's just a piece nailed and glued on. When this is put back together again, because we did it with screws this time instead of nails, each of these screws, 2.5-inch ceramic coated steel screws with that Torx head. Again, that's critical because you can't just screw in all this stuff all the time without twisting off your tips. So this way you can screw it in, screw it out, and still be able to reuse it. That's a key. These babies don't let go. You can use finish nails if you want to position it and come back in and do that. What she was talking about earlier, if you come back in just before you do that with your drill bit and make a little hole a little deeper, then these will be recessed inside. They won't be sticking out the top. Because even though they have these little baby cutters on the back, those cutters won't cut this wood as fast as you want to try to sink it, and you'll end up twisting the head off of the screw. Once this baby goes all the way in, if you've got a really strong drill, before this will give out, sometimes you'll snap the screw off. So this is phase 1. The next phase you'll see later will be when we go ahead and put the trim package on it. And the trim package will turn it to what was sitting over here a little while ago. is the other windows finished out. So you get a chance to see those, and that's the way we set it in there. With all this put together in advance, all the weather stripping done, all the glazing done, because it can be done flat on a table, all this done before we go out to the house, and then we put the unit in. In the old days, when they shipped it from Galveston or wherever it came in at, when they shipped it, it would have come in looking pretty much just like this in a crate. You take it out, you take your two pieces, and you build all of this from scratch. That is the way we used to ship windows all the way up into the early 1900 period, 1920s, 1930s even. And then Sears and Catalog, Montgomery Wards and stuff started putting them all together and shipping them as a unit. And you could buy houses by package from about 1885 on to about 1930s and 40s. It was a huge business. That's how Montgomery Wards and Sears became what they became. Almost biggest thing over housing parts. Any other questions, anybody? Nah. All righty. There's the other one. Okay, good. Bravo. Didn't get the prettier one, but bravo. Ooh, careful, careful. After we've done put this part together, and we have this inner frame, which we can show. Here, I'm going to spin it onto you. That wasn't good. Here, got it? Good. Grab that other side. There we go. That won't matter later on. Okay. This is the this is the frame that you saw right here that we dismantled. This is a longer version of the window. This trim on the outside holds this outer window in. This little bead separates the two. And the trim on the other side, which you saw over there, is what holds the face in. So we just slip this in the hole, except what still isn't showing right here are the wheels. And we've got a set of wheels over there on the table we're going to bring over that'll show you all the different kinds of wheels that can go on there that'll hold the rope. The ropes are tied to a weight that's in the wall, and it goes up and down, one on each side, equal in weight to what it will take to make this guy move up. Right now he must be pinned in just to keep him stable. Anyway, to make it move up and down. So sometimes it's a 6 pound, sometimes it's 10 pound. We'll flip this around real quick, one more time. See how the trim is nailed to the front, how the top is put on there, a crown. Hello. All right. That shows you the trim pieces added on to what he took apart on the table. We're going to lift this off of here now. And this was a stylistic thing. We did this in order to be able to use old tops that had been used before and make them fit our frame. So we just brought this in and cut it off. Now, this is an example of what I was talking about, a weight. Thank you. This weight would be hanging by what's called a sash cord. This is a really poorly made weight. You can see the imperfections in it. All it is cast slag, or what's called pig iron. Not that it was made from pigs. This one's marked on the side, and you'll be able to see it. That's an 8-pounder. Now, in today's school, they might not know that. That's Roman numerals. V is 5, each slash is a 1. And X is a 10-pounder. If you get an X1, it's 11. X11 is 12. So the weights are generally marked in Roman numerals, but you will also see regular numbers on them. You will never see metric in the United States. I've never seen one yet. And sometimes you'll see nothing at all. That is then suspended on a rope that goes over a wheel. What you don't see is this guy sits in here. Whoops, this will be this direction. So that's going to be embedded in here and dropped in the center, dead in the center. So that what you don't see on the other side is happening is when you lift the window up, this guy is going up and down on the cord and lifting the window and making it very light for you. But also, if the weight is ideally balanced, that window will stop wherever you stop at. If it's not, you unlock it, it goes up. If you try to bring it down and close it, you got to hold it down to lock it. The weight's too much. Other alternative is you unlock it and you lift it up and it's heavy. And you get up to the top and you let go of it and it goes. A good example out in the chapel here, our weights are about a half a pound too heavy. Whenever we get a wind and the thing starts to rattle, a couple of locks aren't on there. The bottom sash will rattle a little bit and then it'll go like there's a ghost in there going, I want air, thank you, and lifting them up. And you'll go out there and the windows will be lifted up wherever they're not locked. It's pretty crazy. Would you bring me that drink right there, please? So what I'm going to show you here is a couple of varying degrees, thank you, of quality, because this gives you an idea of how we used to make things. This is the best of the best, because one of the things you want to do is when you tie your ropes, you want to make sure that you tie the weight so that when the window is fully up and the weight's fully down, it does not hit on the bottom. If it does, you get slack in your rope. If you get slack in your rope and it jumps off the wheel, the rope could get caught in between this wheel and the side. And if it does and it gets pinched, too bad for you, because to get it out of there, a lot of times you get a screwdriver, you get all sorts of crazy things trying to get the damn thing unjammed so you can get the thing closed, because inevitably you don't do that until it's an emergency. And it'll pinch this, and this blade on these cheap ones. Now this is a cheesy cheap one. It's made out of a basically pressed tin, wrought. It's called wrought metal, and it's really thin metal. And it came along later when we got faster, cheaper, you know, and people don't know the difference, so give it to them. Now, as it went, there were several kinds. This period was actually prevalent. These are all styles, different, slightly different. This one has a different size hole in the middle. The way they went in is different. Now, cast iron version, before that happened, you drilled 4 holes into the side right here to mount it, and then just popped it in there, and it would grab. That one didn't grab maybe as good, so they end up creating another one. But ultimately, they end up doing screws. The first ones, nice, really clean, hooded. Hold your rope down all the way over the top and back. Now, that takes a lot of materials. If you were to feel the weight of this and feel the weight of one of these, this is 1/10 of the iron or steel that it took to make this in weight. 1/10. So you make 10 of these for the price of one of these. Now, the next version from that was this guy. Yeah, Grace. This guy here. And he didn't have the hood go all the way around. You can see this. It comes part of the way, but it doesn't go all the way around. Again, though, it's really tightly made, really well made. This is a little smaller version of it. Now, from there, they went to this style here where you don't have the hood on the back anymore. And without the hood in the back, that rope can start jumping. One of my interesting favorites, to do it with less screws, this one you went ahead and carved it out so that the bottom, you just slipped the bottom into the notch, pushed it to the top, and one screw held it in. The rope, by virtue of it going over the top and the weight being on this side, caused it to set into the wood and hold itself in. So one screw. That was really clever beaver award there. Each of these that you see are just their variations, and there were lots of companies making these until one company or another got bought out, until their product turned out to be inferior for various reasons. This is a good example of a bad one, because the cast iron, rubbing on cast iron, caused this to wear, and you can see a lot of play in that little axle if you look at it close. Once you get that play in there, then the ropes don't move as easy, or they can lock up or freeze. That's still, though, that lasted probably heavy use for 100 years. These aren't designed to last for any time at all, hardly. And if you do stick that screwdriver up in there, on these you'll bend this little fine little wheel and cut your rope. On these you can break it because it's cast iron. Cast iron is brittle. It's hard as heck, but it's brittle. If I drop it on the floor, it will snap. And so eventually we went to steel, and steel was a much stronger metal and more refined. And that's what these were, steel. But because it was stronger and they could bend it, it was flexible, they needed less of it. So the progression from 1870 and in cast irons, 1880s, 1890s, into the early 1900s. And then we started switching over to not using ropes and using spring mechanisms and all sorts of other things, Spirex that we came up with later. But this is kind of the history of how we lifted a window sash up and down. It's a key component for these to work. The thing we do that's different now than what used to be done in order to make them weather efficient is that where this weight travels, in the past there were two weights, one for the top, one for the bottom. So this space is so big, it's wasted in my opinion because nobody ever used the top. So we took out the one weight and only left in the front weight. What that does is it allows us to spray 2 inches of isonine foam in this gap, and that stops all air movement, heat movement, cold movement through this hole, which is the biggest flaw in an old-fashioned wood window. More wind and more air and everything escape through this than anything else, and bugs and everything else. So by changing that, we now use up half the space and half as insulation, and that's what's allowed us to go ahead and compensate for the biggest flaw in the old windows. The second of which was the wind going around the outside. Since we sealed the top shut, we've minimized that wind. And then by putting the weather stripping in this on the bottom, we've minimized that. If you want to go further than that, you put a storm window on the outside instead of a screen. 4 inches of air instead of krypton gas or argon gas being a 1/4 inch in a vacuum. 4 inches of air, not in a vacuum, will get you dead airspace that will drop the temperature as much as if you went and bought high-end double pane glass windows that are only good for 12 years because once they leak, they fog up. With these, if you do it the other way, if it fogs up, you take it and clean it because there's a bunch of dirt on there or something, and you go ahead and put it back on again. And you don't have to replace your entire window. The amount of energy you save both in creating this window, if you made this out of new stuff, you'd spend a fortune and use up good trees that don't even exist to cut up anymore or import them from someplace where they're cutting down rainforest. If you made them out of plastic or vinyl or aluminum or anything else you can make them out of, you're going to use tons of toxic materials to make them with. The glass is going to take enormous amounts of temperature to melt and create. And in the end, what you save in energy to make this and use these old parts, that alone is more than you'll probably spend in electricity for an entire year on the house. Cooling and heating that you saved and did it without creating any toxins. So that's our lesson on the idiosyncrasies of windows.